What is society from the relational point of view. Now, let's start with the contents of my speech. The first is the issue, and the issue is what is a social fact? We, as sociologists, are trying to understand what is a social fact, and sometimes we get a social fact from many different perspectives, looking at the individual factors or the holistic factors, while relational sociology defines a social fact as a product of a relational context and as a product that induces a relational outcome. For instance, if we look at our meeting here, this is a social fact. It's a social fact that we meet together here in this place. Now we can understand this meeting as an aggregation of many individuals with their individual singular characteristics. Or we can look at our being here as a network of people, a social network of people, a network of relations, not only of nodes, that is, of individuals. Now the question is, can we see the relationships among us, the relationship between me and Doug, between me and Maggie, between each one of us? Usually we do not see these relationships. We think in terms of individuals being here and discussing, dialoguing, watching, etc., etc. Now, the social fact is of a different order. It's another order of reality, which is made up with relations. So the second point is social relations as the object of sociology. What are social relations? This is a very difficult question I will get into in a minute. Then I will go through the definitions and approaches to social relations in modern sociology, let's say from Marx to Max Weber and Simmel to Parsons as well. And my argument is that they didn't understand social relations, or at least they talked about social relations, but without entering into the structure, into the dynamics of a social relations. But they saw relations as the product of individuals or structures or systems. Now, the first sociology which developed the notion of social relation was the sociology by Georg Simmel. And that's why I talk about the relational turn. This is the fourth point in sociology. The basic notion of Wechselwirkung, the effect of reciprocity, which was discovered by Simmel. Then I get into, let's say, contemporary sociology from Parsons through today. And I think that Parsons attempted to systematize social relations, but he failed, basically, because he didn't understand social relations, or at least he reduced social relations to functions, to social functions. And therefore, he gave a very reductive view of social relations. Now, in postmodern sociology, which is the sixth point, we have the dissolution of the social relation in many different forms, in many different ways. So the next step, point 7, would be What does it mean to think relationally? This is a point I think very difficult to deal with, and we need the eighth point, that is an explanation of the relational approach as an epistemology, a paradigm, and a social practice as well. From there, I get into, if I have time, into the ninth point on the relational constitution of the human person. The human person as a relational subject. Maybe you all know the book by Maggie and myself. Now, the last point is a program of work, because I think that relational sociology is a completely new way to look at society, because it is, to talk the language of Doug, a reconstruction of sociology from the very foundations. Now, the first point, what is a social fact? To understand and explain a social fact means to understand and explain its relational constitution, how it is constituted relationally. No one of the classics succeeded in grasping what I mean by relational constitution of a social fact in its complexity and emergence, because no one of the classics achieved what I call a generalized theory of social relations. Now, relational sociology is an attempt to develop this generalized theory, a theory which can give us the understanding and explanation of any kind of relations. Social relations as the object of sociology. Of course, all sociologists speak of social relations, but very few define them explicitly and clearly. I have to mention the Manifesto of Relational Sociology by Mustafa Emir Bayer, where in this Manifesto of Relational Sociology, he doesn't define what a social relation is. That's an example of how difficult it is to find a clear and explicit definition of social relation. Most times, sociology observes social relations through narratives, deriving social relations from other factors, individual or collective. So when relation comes to be assumed as a general presupposition, rarely do sociologists observe it within an epistemology capable of avoiding a form of radical relativism. Relativism is what, particularly in these days, is widespread among those who call themselves relational sociologists. Now, to me, relational means relative to, so it's not relativistic. It's a kind of connection, a kind of link. Relational is not relativism in any sense. So it is very important to distinguish between the relational order of reality and the interactional order of reality. Relations are different from interactions. Interactions sometimes happen within social relations. Sometimes they do not give birth to any proper relationship. Interactions are plays on the social rules, on the social norms provided by social structures and by cultural structures in particular. And particularly at the micro level, at the interpersonal face-to-face level, while the relational order of reality is constituted by dynamic structures. is not an happening or a play on rules. So, to read the slide, both common sense and many sociologists think of a social relations in terms of two actors, A and B, ego and alter, who seek to establish common expectations, so to regulate their interactions, exchanges, through shared values and norms. By this way, the focus is put primarily on the qualities of A and B, of the people, of the individual persons, and their individual contributions to the interactions, while the qualities and the properties of their relationship remain in the background. The qualities and properties of the relationship remain obscure. We cannot really see them. Think of the relationship of love in a couple. When we look at this relationship of love in a couple, we usually observe what is happening to, let's say, Mary and Tony. How each one feels about the other, what are their sentiments, their expectations, etc. And we think of how one relates to the other, but we do not think of the relationship in itself. And now the relational sociology is a way to explain the terms A and B, Mary and Tony, through the relationship, with the relationship, because it's the relationship which explains the terms of the relationship itself. So it is necessary to understand the difference between the relational order of reality and what Goffman has called the interaction order. The interaction order happens within the morphogenetic process. So there is an ambivalence in the way we conceive of the relationship, because the relation, the social relation, is a dynamic process, but this is not enough. Relations are also elaborated structures. And we have to understand the process of morphogenesis, which was created by Maja, in order to understand how interactions and relations work. So at the beginning, let's say at time one, there is a context, a starting context, which is a conditional and conditioning structural network impinging upon people, the individuals, ego and alter, who are in a relationship. Now, between time 2 and time 3, there are social interactions between ego and alter. And it is in this network of interactions that the social structure is changed, so that at time T4, there is a new structure, an emergent relational structure. Now, the interactional order is here, while this is the interactional order, while the relational order is outside it. It's something which emerges from the interactional order and in the end changes it over time, of course. Now, to talk about the foundations of the relational paradigm, I have to explain the three main parts of it: social ontology, the epistemology, and the consequent social practice, because relational sociology is also used in what we call applied sociology or clinical sociology, or whatever you want as a professional and applied utilization of sociology. Now, as to what concerns the social ontology, the realism on which relational sociology is built has these three characteristics, features. It is critical versus positivist, materialist, or naive, what they call direct realism. It is analytical, and this is versus empiricist ontologies, what we call ontological empiricism, and it is relational versus essentialist ontologies. So the main adversary of relational sociology is radical constructivism, and in particular in sociology, Niklas Luhmann. If I had time enough, I would get into that, which claims, radical constructivism, which says that the real is what knowledge indicates as real. Exactly what Doug Popora before said about truth and different understandings of truth. So the phrase, the sentence by Luhmann is, reality is the same observation. This is radical constructivism. And my relational sociology, of course, based upon realism, is opposite, completely opposite to that. Now, the basic assumption at the philosophical level is written in the last line of the slide. Substance or essence or nature, if you want, as a philosophical notion, and relation are co-principles of all that exists. So to think of the interaction, I would say, between substance and relation in the social ontology is not so simple. It's important to say that substance and relation are co-principle, because many philosophers think that if we agree with the relational approach, we leave the substance. We have the substance in the second place, and therefore we don't have any substantial view of what the human being is or what the world is, etc., etc. Now, this sentence, substance and relation, are co-principles of all that exists, of any reality. It's a very suggesting and very intriguing and challenging assumption, because we have to keep both together. We cannot substitute substance with relation or relation with substance in sociology, of course. Now, the problem of the category of social relation in modern sociology is that the notion of social relation as an explicit and autonomous cognitive category was born precisely with modernity, but it wasn't understood by the classics, in the sense that all the classics gave a reductive definition of what a social relationship is. Marx, for instance, as you know, he conceived of social relations as superstructures determined by the economic structure. So it was an economic and positional, I would say, way of defining social relations. Max Weber defined the relation as a referral, that is a symbolic reference between people. He didn't really see the relationship. He talked about how people relate to each other using the same symbols, the same cultural, psychocultural ideas, etc., etc. Now, for Durkheim, the social relation is the structural bond. It's a constraint. It's a religo, something with links and, in the same sense, constrains people, the individuals. So all these are only some examples of how modern sociology invented, in a way, created the notion of social relation, which doesn't exist in classical philosophy, but at the same time had a very reductive, partial view of what a social relation is. Now, the novelty comes from Georg Simmel. Simmel said that a phenomenon is social. There is the social character of a phenomenon when we talk about the social fact. Fact, social is different. The social fact. So a phenomenon is social to the extent that it expresses a particular characteristic, which is sui generis, which is its constituent. Social means constituted by something. What is this something? This is what he calls the interrelation or interdependence, or better, a reciprocal effect, an effect of reciprocity between the terms of the relationship. All these terms are included in the concept of Wechselwirkung. So the social is the relational as such. And what is interesting in Simmel is that he saw the world, the culture of that time, crumbling down. Everything was becoming liquid, we would say, in this moment of our culture. And he tried to contrast this trend of dissolution of society, of culture, etc., by looking at where some solidity could be achieved, realized. And the solidity by which our society stands up still is the social relation. So the solidity of the social relation for relational sociology lies in its being an emergent effect given by these three aspects or dimensions, if you want, of the social relationship. The fact that the social relationship is a religo, according to Durkheim, that is, there is a bond there, there is a structural connection. When we enter into a relationship, we enter into a relational structure, a structural connection, a bond. But it is not only that. It is also a referral, according to Weber. There is a symbolic reference, okay? What Marx, Durkheim and Weber didn't see is that the social relation is also an emerging phenomenon. And this is where Simmel comes into when he talks about the Wechselwirkung. The relationship is a third between the terms. It is a third created by the exchange, or better, the reciprocal action between ego and alter. So there is a third there, and the third is a different order. And you cannot say it's above or beneath or sided in respect to the terms. It's a different level of reality. But it exists with its own structure, its own dynamics, its own order of reality. That's the idea. There was an attempt by Parsons to systematize social relations. And what is the definition by Parsons of social relation? For him, social relation is the reciprocal action of actors positioned in functionally differentiated status roles in a social system. So social relation is something which links these status roles in a social system which has its own mechanism, etc. So relations are a byproduct, we could say, of the social system, of a functional social system. So the human, what we call the human agent, quite immediately disappears from the scene in Parsons. And I cannot go into the Agile scheme now because it's too complex. But anyway, in Parsons, there is already the dehumanization of the social relation, which will be radically reaffirmed and deepened by Luhmann in a neo-functional way, but very much in continuity with Parsons. As to what concerns postmodern sociology, I would say very simply that social relations are conceived as products of themselves, or else as an end in themselves. So this is what we call relationism. Relationism is a way to look at social relations as a product of themselves. Relationism is pragmatism, is relativism, and so on and so forth. And I think that Luhmann was at the beginning of this process, although in its own way. Now, in the sociology of Niklas Luhmann, which is very important to me because I think he was the most intelligent sociologist in Europe in the end of the last century. Social relations have these three characteristics. First, they are subject to radical contingency. A radical contingency in their goals, in their means, in their norms, and in their values. Now, contingency in Luhmann doesn't mean dependence on, which is the classical notion of contingency. To Luhmann, contingency means the possibility of non-being or being always otherwise, which is an ontological, I would say, metaphysical notion of contingency, by which he builds up all his theoretical system. Second, B, social relations are subject to the systemic code of radical functional differentiation, with the loss of reference to stable institutions and cultural traditions. It is obvious that on this basis, any cultural tradition can exist, can survive, not even stable institutions, of course. So the third point is the obvious conclusion. Social relations are reduced to communication and only to communication, which is very much indeed in line with our information society, what we call ICT, the information and communication technologies, what we call the environment, the infosphere, etc., etc., etc. So Luhmann is very much attuned with this historical trend, and that is why sometimes we find that he saw many things that are not happening just now, not maybe 20 or 30 years ago. But what is wrong with Luhmann? Luhmann makes two radical moves. The first one is the fact that he puts the human outside of the social. The differentiation of the social and the human in their relationality is a very sharp move that he makes. This means that the social system is differentiated from the human environment, and the human being fluctuates in the environment of the system, and the system operates by itself. And the second move is that he ascribes social relations to the social system, while human relations are relegated to its environment, so that the human being can be whatever he or she likes. Okay. There were some reconstructive attempts to revive a modern conception of social relations. Habermas, for instance, put forward what we call a normative theory of society, but he failed. Giddens created this theory of structuration, which was criticized particularly by Maggie, because it's what Maggie calls a central conflation. Jeffrey Alexander, he makes a kind of sociology which culturalizes society. Society is only culture, it's semiotics. So all of them, they have tried and still are trying to rethink the social relation from a very reductive, partial, one-sided point of view in sociology. So the crisis of the modern social relation is inevitable, and the problem is how we can deal with the dissolution, the high contingency, the increasing contingency of social relations everywhere. And this scheme, this diagram, is only to suggest that we come from the modern society, and there is a collapse of the modern social relation here, of course. Some trait of the modern way of configuring social relations is still going on, but what we have a turning point, which is the area of morphogenesis, creating or generating what I call an after-modern society. After modernity is not post-modernity. After modernity means that there is a big, deep, radical discontinuity with modernity. Although we cannot see it in this moment, I think that this is the historical trend. The shift to an after-modern society means a fundamental change of the structure of its typical relationality. We can explain the societal changes by looking at the way in which relations are structured. Their qualities and their properties are radically different. So the relational thinking in sociology means that we have to observe reality, the social reality, through these two lenses, I would say, A and B. The first is to see the proper and sui generis reality of social relations. Any relationship has its own proper sui generis quality and causal property. A friendship relationship is not a relationship between the doctor and the patient, between the teacher and the pupil, etc., etc. Any relation has its proper own qualities and causal properties as well. The second lens, in a sense, is that we have to define the objects studied by sociology as relational configurations, as relational entities. Everyone. Work is a relationship. Family is a relationship. Education is a relationship. A corporation is a relationship. Citizenship is a relationship. A war is a relationship, and so on and so forth. To define an object from the sociological point of view as a relationship or a complex of relationships, a relational contested context, is something quite new. Of course, it is also very complex. An example that I give is about the family. What is a family? The family as a social relationship is not something that in the sociology of the family we see very, very, very easily, very often. The post-argument, the postmodern argument about what is a family is that the family is something which is defined by the individuals who belong to an aggregate of people, what we call living together. Okay. So, for instance, Beck, Ulrich Beck, and many others, they define the family in terms of subjective perceptions. They say the perceived family is the family structure. The structure of the family is not a relationship. It is a perception. So that any collectively shared definition of relationships, individual positions, is gone. There is no chance to recover the idea of relationship because subjects and their subjective perceptions define what the family is. There is no reality in the family relationship. This means that the difference between what a family is and what it isn't is simply a border or a slash between social forms of living together. So that family forms have nothing in common, and they are simply separated. There is no one family relationship. Doesn't exist. The reality of the family is gone from the point of view of postmodernist. Now, in order to understand how social relations are important in our life, and I think this is almost at the end of my presentation, I will present this diagram, which is very important to me, how we define a difference, how we define a distinction. For instance, if we want to distinguish what is a family and what is not a family, what is citizenship and not citizenship, what is this and not this, how do we conceive of the difference, of the distinction? Now, my argument is that in modernity, within modern sociology, but modern culture in general, there were so far these two semantics, the dialectic semantics and the binary semantics. The dialectic semantics conceives of the difference as a border. It's a border between ego and outer, between the terms, in which there is at the same time a clash and a sharing between them. This is Habermas' idea about the difference. Difference is a border on which we can come to some agreement, but we remain stranger. We remain external. There is nothing in common except the agreement that there is a border which is a difference, which is a distinction. Nothing more than that. The other one, the second semantic, is the binary semantics by Luhmann, where difference is a slash. It's a separation, a complete, sharp distinction, sharp separation between the terms of the relationship, of the difference. So that both ego and alter, they have their own autopoiesis, and therefore their non-communicability. There is no chance. So this is what Beck calls the normal chaos of love, and so on and so forth. When Luhmann, for instance, defines the couple relationship, the love relationship in a couple, he says, what is love in the couple relationship today? It's a common problematization of the world. The two people, the two partners, stand in front of the shop, and one says, well, I like this, and the other one says, well, I like that or not. A common problematization of the world. So there is no relationship. So the third semantic, which we need, and I think it's emerging, in fact, I don't have time enough, but maybe on Friday we can discuss on that. It's the relational semantics. The relational semantics defines difference. Defines difference as a relation. Difference is not a border. It's not a slash, a binary code. It's a relation. So difference is a dissimilar way to live a relation, which is constitutive both of ego and alter. So there is something in common. The three figures. So ego and alter, they share something. Okay, so that the difference goes through something which is common, but within the difference between the distinction between ego and alter, while in Luhmann there is only the slash, and in Habermas there is this agreement on the borders. So I think I don't have time to get into the epistemology. We know with and through relations. Epistemology is basically relational for this reason. And the practice is that we can use the relational sociology in public services, social services, social policies, everywhere, through the model of networking people, which is a non-directive way to help people to help themselves by changing their relationships. Because social issues are created by relational contexts, and we have to change the context, the relational contexts, in order to solve the social issues. If we think that by changing the individuals, which is terribly difficult, we can change a situation, we fail completely, because the relations are not immediately the product of the individuals. They have a different order of reality. So I come to the end of the presentation, which was very long because I thought I had a lot of time. And I want to sum up the conclusion by saying that this is a work in program. Because sociology wants to know social facts insofar as they are real, as Doug said before. However, we cannot know them, we cannot know the social fact, except in and through relations. Now, the relation is the key for entering into reality and for living it. It's a way of immanence and transcendence at the same time. Second, the relation does not eliminate the terms that it connects. Instead, it reclaims the terms, it explores the terms and expresses the terms of the relationship. Third, the relation is not a pure abstraction, is not a pure form of communication, as Luhmann and many people maintain, but is a concrete reality. And fourth, such a concrete entity cannot be observed through dialectical or binary symbolic codes, but only through a relational semantics. Normally, it has a network structure that connects and creates interdependencies. Of course, it is action-dependent and context-dependent and so on, but this is very long to be explained. And then finally, fifth point, social relations are an absolutely necessary and inevitable mode to regulate normally the contingency of situations which in the social world are not determined a priori. This is very important for social practice when we have to include people, to look for more solidarity, for a real subsidiarity and so on between state and civil society, etc., etc. There are very, very important implications from the practical point of view. Thank you so much for your attention.